Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to another one of the lectures over the disputed letters of Paul. In this case, we're going to look at Colossians, the letter to the church in Colossae. And is this writing in the wake of the apostle, the death of Paul? Well, let's start off with the date, the author, and the audience. If Paul is the author of Colossians, then Paul would have written the letter sometime after he wrote the letter to Philemon. So you have the dates of around 56 to 62 CE/AD. If Paul's not the author, then Colossians was written in the late first century to early second century CE/AD. Onesimus, who is Philemon's slave, is referenced in this letter. So Paul arguably wrote it sometime after that letter to Philemon, if he is the author. But if he's not the author, then have dates of late first century to early second century. And the audience is to the church in Colossae, which consisted of Jewish and Gentile Christians. So let's look now at the contents of the letter. Is this Paul? Is this the Apostle Paul? Well, one thing about the letter is that the writing style has been called into question, particularly the minimum use of conjunctions and infinitives compared to the undisputed letters. So with conjunctions, we're referring to and or buts. With infinitives, things like to be, to seem, to hear, to eat, etc., etc. How there's minimum use of this compared to the undisputed letters of Paul. Now, does this mean that Paul is not the author? Not necessarily. There's a couple of examples of this. I'm going to give one before moving to a point that references the other, obviously. Um, let's say that I gave you a piece of writing, and I told you that this was written by Stephen King, the American author. And you read it, and you tell me this was not written by Stephen King. And I then ask you for an explanation. And your response is Stephen King's writings are essentially horror suspense novels. This work is a type of medieval fantasy. Okay, well, Stephen King, of course, is known for writing horror suspense novels, but in my example, what I presented was, in fact, a Stephen King novel. There's a novel that he wrote called Eyes of the Dragon, which is essentially a medieval fantasy type of novel. It's not like the genre of what he's known for writing, but he did write it. So even though the writing style may be different from what is traditionally, you could say, a Pauline letter, that doesn't mean that he couldn't write something differently. But could the writing style differences be explained because Colossians was written by a scribe? So I'm going to read here the portions from Colossians and then tie this in. Tychicus will tell you all the news about me. He is a beloved brother, a faithful minister, and a fellow servant in the Lord. I have sent him to you for this very purpose, so that you may know how we are, and that he may encourage your hearts. He is coming with Onesimus, the faithful and beloved brother, who is one of you. They will tell you about everything. And then at the end of the letter, I, Paul, write this greeting with my own hand. Remember my chains. Grace be with you. Okay. So the argument here is that Tychicus is essentially the person writing this. It's not explicitly clear, but you can draw that case, and that Paul, in the end, signs off on it. That could explain some of the differences in the writing style because someone else wrote it, but Paul dictated it. Here's another question, though, related to Colossians, as I have here a spiritual circumcision. Okay, what I want to do is also read from this passage in Colossians. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the universe, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have come to fullness in him, who is the head of every ruler and authority. In him also you were circumcised with a spiritual circumcision, by putting off the body of the flesh in the circumcision of Christ. And when you were buried with him in baptism, you were also raised with him through faith in the power of God, who raised him from the dead. And when you were dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive together with him when he forgave us all our trespasses, erasing the record that stood against us with its legal demands. He set this aside, nailing it to the cross. Big thing there is that spiritual circumcision, where Paul, if it is him, is stating that you weren't, and this would be to, Gentiles, you weren't, of course, actually circumcised in the literal sense, but you were in a spiritual sense. Like almost how like the Jewish people have something kind of above you, the fact that they were circumcised, because of course they were the chosen people of God. You weren't, but because of Christ in baptism, you have received a spiritual circumcision. And one of the traditional theological understandings of baptism is that it replaces circumcision because, of course, within Judaism, how one joined the covenant of the God of Abraham was through circumcision, whereas within Christianity, it's now through baptism. But the thing is, though, the use of the terms here, spiritual circumcision, is that Paul? Does that sound like Paul? Well, considering the rhetoric that he gives in Galatians, this is very, very odd rhetoric. I don't think he would have any problem with it, but it is odd, particularly with his discussions regarding the Jewish Torah or law. As for my own judgment regarding Colossians, I'm indifferent. I could see it both ways. I really don't have a judgment either way on the letter. But in any case, that's all that we do have for the letter to the Colossians. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Till then, take care.